Great.
Well, David Hairston, welcome. Thank you. You mind telling me who you are and a little about yourself?
Certainly. Chris, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast today. So my name is David Hairston, and I am the chairman of Safe Access Tennessee. Safe Access Tennessee is a patient advocacy group that advocates for medicinal cannabis in Tennessee. We are a chapter of the Americans for Safe Access, which is the largest kind of patient-oriented advocacy group and union in the United States. There's more than 100,000 members across the nation, and I think the Americans for Safe Access is probably the leading medical advocacy group that really works on solid medical policy and really attempts to legislate and move things where they're more in the patient's favor. That isn't always the same with all the other advocacy groups. So we're delighted to be associated with the Americans for Safe Access. We have political action groups spread across the state of Tennessee. There's about a dozen. We will have meetings fairly routinely in each area. A lot of that depends upon what folks in the individual area want to do. I know you and I had the opportunity to meet down at a place in the Chattanooga-Hickson area where Safe Access Tennessee Chattanooga, we've had a number of folks there. It's a great group that you have there in Chattanooga. We're active on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Safe Access Tennessee, and you can also see our websites at safeaccesstn.org. So
now, I met you in 2017. We came out for a bunch of hearings at the House, and y'all did a great job, presenting a lot of stuff that how you would like the medical scene going forward, how you would like to educate people, because we are in the dark ages of marijuana and we're trying to come out of it. And how do you see educating people who are still kind of not really been exposed to this type of thing?
Well, I mean, really the social and political movement in the United States has done a lot of great work for us. It is true, in any great endeavor, it takes years to get things through a political process. So this will be kind of our 5th year in earnest with Republican sponsorship in the Tennessee General Assembly. While we love our Democratic members and representatives and patient members, the legislature in Tennessee is so dominated by Republicans. It's 75% in both bodies. So you just really have to, get yourself aligned to what that body's willing to do. And we've seen a movement from a lot of hell no's in the Republican caucus and mostly yeses in the Democrat caucus to virtually everybody in the Democratic caucus is ready for medicinal cannabis reform, and a good solid majority of the Republican caucus is. It's just that, and this is something a lot of our advocates don't appreciate. The folks who run for state representative and state senator are very well-meaning, dedicated people, and almost to a person, the best I can tell in my workings with them for the last 4 years, they take their oath to serve the citizens of Tennessee very carefully. So a lot of the concern about cannabis has been around the historical myths that have just taken root in our country since 1937. And when you've had the federal government in active lying mode for the past 80 years, it's just going to take time to get that unwound.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like they just have their head in the sand, or they're just willfully ignoring some of the things that we have brought good science forward on, and with the limited research that we can really do within the United States. But I see that a lot, especially in your feed. You do a good job of kind of going through and talking to people and give them some good points. But when we're so far backwards, do you feel like they're just willfully ignoring it, or they're just actually ignorant and don't believe it? Because I've heard people say that the medical cannabis thing is a ruse and it's really not what it's pitched to be.
Well, there's certainly a segment that's kind of left over from old times that believe that believe what they've been told by the federal government. And it's actually very sad, because most of those people wouldn't naturally fall for such a foolish thing. So, it is quite disturbing, but, a lot about politics is making sure we gain social consensus, that you actually have a solid majority of the citizens for a particular, subject or area. And really, it's the last 5 years of the social changes, just citizen-to-citizen changes that have changed so dramatically with respect. As the other states have achieved some pretty good successes with medicinal cannabis, you find more and more patients having access to other states. Probably the number one drug route, I'm guessing right now, is the United States mail. There's very little limitations.
They're the mules these days.
Yeah,
they have to have warrants to open your stuff.
Yeah, and there's so much economic activity shipped through small packages that it's nearly impossible for the government to.
I think they estimated at least $1 billion goes out of Colorado. But I mean, in that case, I'm glad it's not going to gangs in Mexico or cartels and things like that. At least it's small growers.
Yeah, I mean, as critical as we might want to be of the recreational efforts in some state, they've pretty much wiped the Mexicans out of the business.
Yeah.
There's all kind of talk about drugs at the wall and that type thing, but I would say generally cannabis grown in Mexico is not a competitive product in the U.S. any longer. That's a pretty significant misnomer that we have in opposition to us on these bills. And to be quite frankly, there's often a lot said about Big Pharma, but I don't really see them pumping a lot of money into this. There might be one-off players who do something in Tennessee. It's law enforcement that really is so far off track with respect to cannabis policy and drug policy in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I can understand doing your job from the police perspective, but I would like to see a kinder attitude towards some of these things and nonviolent criminals. What do we have going up? Isn't there something with changing it from an ounce or less to a misdemeanor?
Well, I do believe that there's a decriminalization bill ongoing, and I have to confess, I don't watch those bills as closely as I've kind of participated in the development of legislation with Senator Dickerson, who's my senator, and Dr. Brian Terry, who's the chairman of the House Health Committee. I think that that's going to be the primary legislation that gets done this year. Through criminal justice reform, I had really hoped that we could get some form of decriminalization. I do believe, just as a rational matter, we probably need some form of decriminalization. The penalties for marijuana possession and use are simply too high. They do not match the risk. Well, they've never matched the real risk profile, even to those that abuse drugs, but particularly to patients who need drugs. Now, the one thing I will say is while I stay pretty aggravated at a lot of law enforcement leadership in our state, I think they're failing the citizens, quite frankly. For the average the average police officer that you meet on the street or on the road, we generally find the more experience the officer has, the less likely they are to arrest a patient. It is the inexperienced people that arrest patients. And then, of course, there's obviously the ability to probate people who have prior convictions or are arrested on truly violent criminal activity, because there's over 34,000 marijuana arrests still in Tennessee. It's an unbelievable number, particularly when you compare it to the number of heroin arrests. There's only slightly more than 2,500. So, that's a big area of work. Criminal justice reform. Our governor is for criminal justice reform. I know he made a recent comment about decriminalization, stating, he really wasn't for that. But one must be very careful, when you ask an elected official about these items, exactly what does decrim mean? And to him, probably, I'm guessing decrim means fully legalized, pot shops everywhere. You got to remember, they don't conceive number one, most legislators are not patients.
Mhm.
So they don't have the patient mindset. They don't appreciate the pretty active struggles of the average cannabis patient in Tennessee. There's probably a widespread notion that there are a lot of young, healthy stoners who just want to go get high, who claim they have pain or claim they have anxiety, when the reality of my experience with you here in Nashville promoting, and down in Chattanooga and up in the Tri-Cities area, there's a lot of really ill people. And this is one of the things I try, once I can get a legislator's attention, I try to draw out a couple of facts, like epidemiology of the diseases that are helped with medicinal cannabis in Tennessee are pretty striking. There's, the Alzheimer's group has about 120,000 active patients in Tennessee. There are slightly over 300,000 cancer patients in Tennessee. There's about 75,000 epileptics. There's another 100,000 or so with ALS. And the one that's the real shocker that I don't think people appreciate very much, and happens to be my condition, I have psoriatic. I'm disabled with psoriatic arthritis, which is an autoimmune inflammatory disease that greatly affects the pain in the joints. For folks with severe arthritis, and that would include rheumatoid, severe osteo, but not just normal getting old osteo. It's not just grandma's arthritis. This is a severe form that's disabling from work. Psoriatic RA, osteo, and any of the other unique forms of arthritis, that's 770,000 Tennesseans. So rather easily the epidemiology reveals that we have about 1 million citizens that could potentially use cannabis as an approach. 80% of those are going to revolve around kind of 3 major issues, which is nausea, spasticity, tightening of the muscles, and related chronic pain.
Right, and you've been a patient in other states, correct?
Yes, in fact, when I first started this, I became medically disabled in 2014, and I spent most of 2014 just trying to do acupuncture, opioids, kind of the standard treatments, standard of care treatments. And for a severe form of arthritis, 3 or 4 Vicodin a day is a standard of care because it is such a painful disease. And that doesn't mean that you're pain-free. It just means that you can walk that day, taking 3 or 4 Vicodin. So I tried that for a year and was pretty unsatisfied. Well, number one, you're pretty unsatisfied when you've had a very rewarding professional career. I was a CPA, a partner at a major international firm, pretty successful independent mergers and acquisitions consultant, a lot of really quality clients and work worldwide, and then to suddenly become disabled. It's very shocking.
How do you feel, as the professional that you are, that cannabis, taking a tincture or however form you prefer to take it, and then you're fine to go about your day, right, and perform as a professional?
For the most part, and I do think this is a kind of a delicate gray area here. I think, every patient who takes any medicine needs to be careful about what they do. Mm-hmm. Every single medicine can be abused. There are no medicines that I've seen that cannot be abused. We have people abusing anti-diarrhea drugs, neuropathy drugs when they're taken in combination with other things. We have, I tell you one of the most shocking things about these drugs, there's over 100,000 people who show up in the ER every year with stomach bleeds. Mm-hmm. That's mostly aspirin and ibuprofen, what is considered a relatively safe drug. And about 25,000 of those people die every year. And to the best of our knowledge, nobody's ever died from cannabis, but it helps with the inflammation and the pain in a very similar manner to ibuprofen or aspirin. It does have psychotropic effects, and that's where I do think people need to be exercise care. I can tell you on probably over 50% of my days, the cannabis, helps me in the performance because, and this is the thing most people don't actually realize about being a chronically ill person. the pain is overwhelming. I'm far more scared of getting caught out driving somewhere and there be a storm come through and I'm in pain and can't drive home, versus either taking a Vicodin, which is an opioid, or taking a small amount of cannabis tincture. I would say, generally my abilities are superior to that. Now, there are times when the pain is very severe, and it's a choice between taking I try to avoid the opioids at kind of all costs, but everybody breaks down with the torture. Sometimes the pain's so bad you just can't get any sleep at all. And, for me, a lot of that's kind of weather related. As strange as that sounds, this is not, nobody ever talks about this, but for those 770,000 people in Tennessee with severe arthritis, the weather makes a big difference.
Yeah.
The weather will drive dosing.
A lot of rain too.
Yeah, the weather will drive dosing for a lot of those people. It isn't, so the concept of taking the same dose all the time really doesn't apply the same way with cannabis as a medicine. I don't take the same, on days when I don't need it, I don't take it. I will generally take a CBD oil just about every day to maintain those levels. And then, as a practical matter, if you take CBD and you supplement that with a THC-oriented product, you're not going to get anywhere near the psychotropic effect. So an experienced patient, once they learn to titrate up on both cannabidiol and THC products, will learn how to balance that.
Yeah.
But, most assuredly, we should recognize some of the concerns. One of the concerns law enforcement has raised is, what are you going to do about people driving?
It is a whole new ballgame whenever you've gone from not having access to the stuff and then having a well-grown product and all of a sudden taking it and then...
Yeah, and this is what people... And this all revolves around the fact that we made it illegal to research it, and we haven't done any medical development in 80 years.
Yeah.
This was the probably most common medicine prior to 1937. It's extremely common, and most Americans took it. So, we need to keep in mind some things we're going to do with this drug right now. While it's still in a development stage because there's such a large potential. When we do have the freedom to actually conduct the academic research, I think we're going to see dramatic takeoff in efficacy and other things. But to do that, one of our major points that we've made at Safe Access Tennessee is we want a medically oriented bill and we want a medical supply chain in Tennessee. We know we're going to have a rec supply chain. There's no doubt. When you look at the Pew Research numbers, you see what's happened with states going to recreational. There's really no way to avoid the rec issue coming to Tennessee. Recreational products are commonly available. What's not commonly available is properly researched medical products. That's the goal that we would love to see in this year's legislation. And I think with physician sponsors who are primarily our sponsors of legislation that we're supporting, with Dr. Dickerson and Dr. Terry, that's what we're going to see this year.
Yeah, you're going to be on the right side of history. It's just what year is it going to happen? When is it going to change?
Absolutely. I think it's an extremely high potential. This will be breakthrough drugs, and it will knock out big segments of big pharma areas, particularly in antiemetic, which is a nausea issue, spasticity, and then in pain control that doesn't involve opioids. So, with respect to an antiemetic, because of my condition, I get nausea. So I've tried the anti-nausea medicines, the FDA, they're not competitive.
Yeah.
If you're taking a decent cannabis tincture or a decent medical cannabis product, it is in fact superior to the FDA products for nausea. The same with spasticity. I've taken baclofen and the 2 or 3 kind of generic antispasmodics. They will not be competitive products. People
sleep for me. I know that anything putting me to sleep and keeping me asleep is a big deal.
Well, that's a very common thing with chronic pain patients and folks who've had traumatic brain injuries is the ability to sleep. And this is where folks don't, they think so many of our patients are like normal folks. Well, the majority of our patients don't get good sleep.
Yeah.
It's just, and this is, you're a vet, so you probably know plenty of vets with service-related PTSD.
Yeah.
It's often the inability to just sleep that tips them right over.
Just even the day-to-day life, getting aggravated. Xanax doesn't really help that. It can help some symptoms, but as far as being agitated and irritated, cannabis will calm you down a lot more. Sorry, baby. I got my kid here with me today.
She's a big help.
Yeah. But yeah.
Benzodiazepines, which Xanax is one of those.
I'm a better father when I have pot.
Yeah, the people are not, and this is so common, particularly with the opposition, they do not understand the relative risks of these FDA medicines and even alcohol, which is so commonly available in our society. They completely, because they believe the lies that were told in Washington, D.C. From 1937 on, their conception of the risk is so much higher than reality. And this is one of the bigger things that we're fighting, is make sure that people understand their real risk profile. Here at Safe Access Tennessee, we're about patients and fighting for patients. So our opinion is all medicines can be abused, and that no patient properly using medicine should be abusing it.
Right.
I think that for the most part, the dangerous parts of abusing these medicines, in any of the addictive medicines or so-called addictive medicines, evolves around addiction and what happens when the person gets addicted and how they act as they are.
But even cannabis has helped me break addiction over time. When I was young, I got into stupid stuff. And I hear a lot of people talk about the gateway drug theory. And one thing that has always kind of aggravated me is because I've never really felt that my point of perspective from the gateway theory has been presented. It started with alcohol, tobacco, and then I did try marijuana, and then it was so nice and good for me, even as a teenager, I felt like, what is my government keeping from me? And that was my perspective to go on and try other things. It wasn't.
Well, this is precisely the key moral question here is it appropriate to tell a lie to get a good result?
Yeah.
And my opinion is, my theology and ideology doesn't get there. It's not appropriate. We clearly have had lies told about this medicine, and this is one of the common problems we've had with drug education since the 70s. There are such obvious lies, and this is where law enforcement really gets into trouble, as they have, as a matter of policy, they've promoted these lies. It's not that they fully understand that they're lying, right? They don't even realize that they actually believe that's the things that they're saying are true, and they're just not true. They just
have you been targeted at all for being?
No. It's and this gets to another. There's plenty of racial disparities in our country. I'm a 61-year-old white man who had a professional background.
Right.
The police could come after me, but I have resources. I can hire an attorney.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I shouldn't have to. But if need be, I could hire an attorney. I get a very different result than if I was a 61-year-old Hispanic man that was homeless.
Right.
Or a 61-year-old black man down in Memphis with a blue-collar job. Those folks don't get the same breaks. And this is clearly kind of recognized more on the left. It's not as much recognized on the right. But it's starting to come around now, with criminal justice reform being so fully supported by our governor and so many solid, what I call conservatives. We're really starting to see that turn, where people are just looking and saying, wait a minute, the facts are just so off here. We've really got to do something about it.
You're a real balanced guy. Can you help kind of balance something out for me? And
Sure.
What I hear other people talk about is, you see Bill Lee take so much, or as much as he could, campaign finances and donations from the private prison industry. We have seen how marijuana has become a funnel for the private prison industry. He doesn't want to criminalize, so he's getting money there. And where I want to balance out is, I don't believe the taxpayers should be paying for rapists and murderers to be living. I believe in privatization and turn it into a business, but yet they still get taxpayer dollars. So it's like I'm for the idea of the privatized business of it, but I don't want to see a funnel.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'm right there with you. And you got to remember, Core Civic, which is one of the largest entities, is a Nashville-based corporation. I'm still a member of a country club, and there's a lot of the executives that are they're active in the community. They certainly have a goal around running jails. I just think I'd like to see them redirected into serving mental health beds.
Yeah.
I believe, and I believe Billy generally believes this. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but he believes in criminal justice reform and true redemptive work. And if that's the case, we've got to get the jail cleared of these mental health. It's upwards of 40 or 50% of the people have mental health problems, and it's often these mental health problems show themselves in substance abuse. But we've so criminalized substance abuse, we have just swept up what could be normally good people who just needed a little mental health guidance. And locking a man up in a jail cell, I don't think does much for his mental health.
No, and then even on the other side of that is with the decriminalization or the criminalization of it, when you have somebody who's schizophrenic going into their doctor and they're using pot and they can't tell their doctor that because they're afraid of it, they can't get the back end of it and the real honest, not just don't do this because this is illegal, this is what I have to tell you, this is, there's some science to say that these things can induce psychosis and things like that for certain people.
I mean, that's a great point. I actually think one of the most dramatic opportunities for us from a clinical and medicinal perspective is in the psychiatric med area. I think, I've finally kind of gotten to the stage after 5 years where becoming disabled has been a blessing to me because I'm able to see things that I wasn't necessarily able to see before. Probably one of the most shocking things I have found is the number of particularly bipolar patients who solely use cannabis and that's their only medicine.
Right.
And they lead normal, productive lives. They're not holed up in their rooms. They're not living on the street. They're being normal, productive citizens. So I honestly believe that's kind of like a market test for the fact that we're going to get great psych medicines, way better than these benzodiazepines. We mentioned Xanax before. That's a terrible drug.
Yeah.
It makes you feel terrible.
And see, as a veteran coming out, like I was flown off the aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, dropped off in California, and then I started going to school. So straight out of the middle of the Persian Gulf, the war effort and all that, to basically having nothing, the doctors say, okay, you need some of these drugs. But I was with cannabis. I was in Northern California, the Berkeley area, so I had access to, but taking large doses of cannabis when I could would really calm me down and help me focus on my schoolwork. So much so that I graduated with a double major, double minor. But when I came to Tennessee, I didn't have access to that. I would start getting those jitters, that anxiety, and I would have to leave, drive 30 miles home, take my medicine, come back, and still perform. I wish I could have just gone to my car, taken a tincture or an edible or something along those lines.
This gets back to what I was referencing before. The way cannabis works in the ill person is different than the way it works in the healthy 21-year-old college student.
Yeah.
Smoking a joint in his college dorm room.
Right.
It's an entirely different reaction.
Because I excelled, and I credit marijuana with a lot of that. I don't think if it wasn't there for me, I wouldn't have been able to focus and succeed and focus my efforts.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Because I know what it's like with no medicine, and it's the pain levels are so high that for so many of our chronically ill people, that pain level is like 5, 6, or 7 right before puking.
Right.
It's extremely high level, and anything you can do to knock that pain level back to a 3 or 4, which is where most people might head to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Most of these chronically ill patients don't go to the emergency room. Chronically ill people avoid the emergency room as much as they can.
Yeah.
Because if you have any uniqueness in your disease, you can really get hurt in an emergency room. They're not trained to handle.
And if you don't have insurance, that's another thing. It's easier to go get a $10 bag and then treat yourself than it is if you don't have insurance.
Exactly, and this is why I'm so excited about this year's medical program, because it requires a doctor-patient relationship and for you to consult with a pharmacist. And I think the free market principles that have been drawn up in this program will help us, in Tennessee at least, match the price decline we'll see with cannabis-based products.
Do you ever take high sativas?
I will occasionally use a high sativa. It's I would typically only do that in the morning when I'm very interested in work. It's actually almost like a stimulant.
Yeah.
You know, once your body normalizes to cannabis and you titrate it up, and there's really no question about this. I don't claim this is a medical benefit, but your creativity level is quite it's substantially higher.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things.
Well, you're not listening to this whole sit over there and be quiet, huh? Sorry, I'm not giving you attention, baby.
Well, we can cut that down. So.
With the high sativas, though, what are you doing, girl? I love you, baby. But with the high sativas, for the people who don't know, that's the side of the marijuana, the cannabis, that can be associated with elevated heart rate and paranoia and things like that. But for me, the paranoia gets me self-reflective. Should I behave that way today? And then I get guilty and conscious on myself, and it keeps me in line. It helps me as a better person. That paranoia is more like, Chris, you should have behaved better.
Each person can react quite differently. The one thing I've never seen is the reaction that the government says that it will make you crazy.
Right.
Now, I don't think schizophrenic and manics should be using high sativas.
Right.
They should be avoiding that, but there are plenty of other cannabinoid products they can do that doesn't cause that.
And if you come to a bud tender, somebody that works at a dispensary, you can tell them this is what I suffer with, and they can keep you away from it. Because I worked in a dispensary. I would never give high sativa to people who said that they're, dealing with mental issues. Come on,
it's irresponsible.
Baby. Yeah,
it's just flat irresponsible.
But I could give them something in the mid-range that would not knock them out, but give them some relief, get them going through the day.
Yeah, I tend to use more. I think I like Dr. Russo's. He calls them chemivars, which are kind of representative chemical components based on the variety of the plant. I am not particularly hot on the dispensary names that most of these have. I would prefer some other titling, but clearly for me, because I have so much joint pain and spasticity, the indicas tend to
I was like
work
when I
a
was
little
in
bit better.
Northern California, it was hard for me to find one. It's called Patients Care Collective. I had no idea what it was dealing with, but you go some of these other places, it's pretty much flat out, more of a liquor store approach.
Yeah, it's a rec shop.
Yeah.
I mean, quite frankly, that's probably the solution for rec. I don't advocate for rec. It's not my business. I most definitely believe we need separate supply chains for medicinal, and the liquor supply chain would be just fine for most recreational drugs.
Yeah.
Alcohol is a recreational drug. Lots of folks don't want to admit that in Tennessee and other places, but alcohol is a recreational drug, and we've reconciled ourselves to what's really a pretty dangerous drug.
Yeah, because with her, I can't use cannabis. They'll come and take my kids if I ever find out that I'm doing it or anything like that. So they leave me with alcohol, which makes me get drunk and gives me the bright ideas that do I want to go somewhere? Do I want to go out?
Yeah, it's
instead of just
drug.
Staying home, working on what I got to work on, minding my own business, going to bed at a good time. And
the whole issue with DCS.
I don't like people knowing I smoke pot. It's none of their business. I don't need to be flamboyant or flagrant about it.
Right.
Right.
Well, you have a medicinal use. You have a specific purpose that you find efficacy in, and that's what we want for all patients.
Right.
In Tennessee.
Johan, that was his name, Johan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he came out.
Johan Marcoux.
Yeah, he gave a great testimony before. the people last year. Y'all had everything set up beautifully, just boom, boom, boom. Every point that anyone wanted to argue, y'all were there on it.
Yeah, the Medical Cannabis Task Force really raised a lot of, Jeremy Faison did a wonderful job. With that, we just didn't have the political alignment that I think we have probably this year. We didn't have as many physicians involved. We this year have some support from the pharmacists who are in the legislature. So I think the kind of overall attitude towards it will be different for us this year.
And we do have politicians coming forward saying, "Hey, I've switched my opinion in the last year," which
absolutely.
is great.
Very clearly. I mean, some of the notable examples: Janice Bowling, who sponsored one of the bill and is a great friend of mine, and I just love Janice. I said she was a hell no.
Yeah, exactly.
24 months ago, and she's very positive. Can you sit there? All right, we can wait till it ends.
Yeah, that'll be all right. We'll start wrapping this up because we could go forever. I keep talking, but
yeah, I don't even know how long we've gone.
What potential do you really think we have this year? What do you really think to see go through?
I think we have a great potential to win a medicinal cannabis program this year. It's not going to have everything we want in it as advocates, and that's part of the political process that people need to be around for a few years to see. You don't get everything you want in politics, right? If you live in a violent fascist society and you're in charge, you can get everything you want.
Right.
But that's not the society we live in. We have to have balanced interests. So, I expect us to have a legislation this year. Some folks aren't going to like it. It's not going to have smokable cannabis in it because the votes are not there. We could probably present no end of clinical evidence, but it's an emotional, social issue, not necessarily a fact-based issue. And we see, we're starting to see the states that ban, smoking cannabis bring flower back to the fold.
Yeah, Florida.
Yeah, Florida's right in the middle of that. Arkansas went through this debate. The fact is, combustion smoking cannabis is probably not the best modality.
Yeah.
There are multiple modalities. There's buccal under the tongue. There's other inhalation therapies. There's obviously ingestion. All three of those can have a different clinical response in the patient. The thing that really confuses most people on this smoking issue is that broadly in our state, most people think smoking tobacco and smoking cannabis is at the same risk level.
Yeah, don't crawl up there.
They think smoking
Go sit in the
tobacco.
corner.
They think smoking tobacco and cannabis is the same risk level. It's just not.
Right.
The average tobacco smoker smokes 10 or 100 times more combusted material than a flower smoker. So it really isn't the same. And because we haven't had appropriate research, we actually don't have a good fact base. There's not a solid fact base for prohibiting it. It's a social, emotional reaction. I would love to be able to get some science on that because I do think because patients only have these access to these recreational products, they use it in a rec manner.
Yeah.
Dr. Sulak up in Maine has done some really wonderful work with people about getting them off of smoking and reducing their total volume of THC. This is probably where the future is low dosage tinctures, low dosage pills, low dosage inhalation therapies. Small amounts through the day, or 1 or 2 in the morning, 1 or 2 in the afternoon, 1 or 2 at night is likely going to be the path, and not, smoking up a bunch of joints.
Yeah, and as a grower, somebody who's got time growing and has seen some things, even in Colorado, some of these larger dispensaries, they have beautiful product, smell is great, but I can sit there, I can touch it, I can squeeze it, I can drop it on the table and tell that there's carcinogens and things in there that I don't want to smoke and I don't want to be involved in. Yet as big money comes in and they tie up all the rights and the licenses to grow, me as a small-time grower trying to grow for medicine and knowing what I've done and what I've put into the plant, well, obviously we're far from even being able to get to that point.
Well, I hope this year we're going to, number one, in my discussions with Dr. Dickerson and Dr. Terry, they're interested in a free market bill. Mm-hmm. And this may be very surprising to a lot of the people. The idea that we're going to have a crony capitalism deal and 5 or 6 people are going to get all the licenses cannot pass in Tennessee.
Okay.
People are really misled by what's going on in most of the other states, and I'm relatively close to this, particularly in the Republican. There's not an appetite for these crony capitalism deals. There's really not. We actually pick up more votes doing a free market deal, and it's a way better for the citizens of the state of Tennessee, because here's why. If you just mock these rec products, you're not going to get real medical development. If you only do rec level quality standards, you're not going to get the type of quality measures that patients need. We're giving this to very ill children, very sick older adults. You just cannot have heavy metals and the other carcinogens that are so common in the rec market. This is one of the absolute key reasons why I think we need to establish a clear-cut medical supply chain completely separate from whatever rec market comes in the future. We're going to get a rec market.
Sooner or later.
Yeah, sooner or later, probably within a few short years, we're going to get that rec market. The strategic question is, will we have a medical supply chain that serves patients? That's the critical strategic issue. I don't see the rec market delivering that for patients. And we see this pretty consistently. State of Washington shut down all the medical dispensaries when they went rec. Same with state of Oregon. I lost my Oregon card when they went rec. Nevada just opened up the rec market for medical dispensaries for rec, and they ran out of product. We see some disparities happening in Michigan with their arrival for having rec markets. So New Mexico's undergone, they came very close to a gutting of their medical program in the interest of rec, and I believe they have avoided that at this point. But like I said, I'm not going to advocate for rec. The rationale for doing that is very different, and we don't have the votes in Tennessee for that, but it is coming.
Yeah.
There's at least a $1.5 billion market in recreational product in Tennessee right now. We're one of the top producing cannabis states, and always have been. We just don't officially recognize it.
Exactly. Well, we do have some nice grows going on now, and a lot of good things happening.
Well, we see the hemp program really taking off now, and even in our legislative body, we see now the moonshining and the drug running of NASCAR,
right,
which is essentially what NASCAR is, a celebration of drug running.
Yeah.
That is actually what the history is. The people who ran alcohol out of the hills, they just converted over to cannabis a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's what really happened. So.
Well, David, I'll wrap it up and not take up any more of your time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast, and I'm happy to do this anytime. I'm so excited to go meet your representative this afternoon, and I want to encourage all the patients in Tennessee to come down.
And what would be your best advice for them to moving forward to keep pressure on?
Well, if they already feel comfortable calling up their representative and scheduling a meeting, do that. If someone needs help, and I hope with this podcast you can share my contact information. I'm happy to help any real patients get in to see their legislative representatives and give them some guidance. We have conducted 2 major senior advocate training sessions. So we have trained up probably about 30 to 35 people around the state right now to do this type of activity, and it is not difficult. This is really easy stuff, guys. Please come down to Cordell Hall, and we will show you how to go meet that representative. And if you're concerned or and whatever about it, we'll help you.
All right. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. We good?
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Thank you.
thought that was
Yeah.
nice.
And then
I
I
mean, I
found
think
out
you
to
got
run
to
you
clip
too
out.
long
You got to clip out a little bit of noise, but
Why
Yeah.
did it take a long time?
because we were talking, baby. You
what
did
happened
pretty
to your
good.
what happened to your cartoons?
Well, I forgot a secret button.
Yeah, what did
Forgot
you
the
do?
secret button.
You see that one on the bottom?
Oh, you pressed that one and shut it off, huh?
The secret one. Now I know how to turn it off.
I guess you were good up until that happened, huh?